This analysis is all about OKLO Inc. and how they're positioning their fission tech.
Right. As the go-to power source for the massive energy demands of the AI data center boom.
Exactly. So let's just dive right in. First point of critique, the robustness of that core story. The material, it makes a very strong case for OKLO. It lays out the huge energy cost of the AI revolution, points out that solar and wind just can't keep up, and then positions OKLO's Aurora as the essential solution.
Yep.
And it correctly flags what it calls the efficiency dip as the primary bear case. The risk that some new super efficient chip from Google or Meta could suddenly slow down that energy demand.
That foundation is definitely there. It's clearly established. But that crucial energy crisis narrative, while it's well established in the document, it really needs more insulation against the structural risk that these efficiency gains could even temporarily decouple demand from the need for massive new power.
I can see that. The current rebuttal, as I read it, it seems to lean pretty heavily on this generalized expert consensus.
It does.
The idea that, quote, total compute demand will rise so fast that it will simply outpace efficiency gains. I mean, for a deeply technical audience, that just feels a bit like an appeal to authority, doesn't it?
Exactly. It's not rooted in the material's own data. And, relying on consensus, no matter how informed it is just a rhetorical weakness when you're talking about a high-stakes investment analysis.
But isn't that efficiency dip just the standard worry in the industry? Why is it structurally dangerous for this specific argument?
Well, the danger is that if you're presenting OKLO as the necessary response to an imminent crisis,
right,
and then a major hyperscaler, say, releases a new ASIC that temporarily halves their power needs for the same output, well, the perceived urgency of that crisis just falters.
And with it, the urgency to buy nuclear power. Okay, I get it. The material needs to neutralize that uncertainty before it even comes up.
Which brings us to the core weakness. The current rebuttal, it just lacks specific weight. So the suggestion for improvement here is to integrate that rebuttal directly into the existing data points. We need to show how the sheer scale of existing, validated demand, and specifically referencing that switch partnership, structurally overwhelms any localized efficiency improvements.
Okay, so the key piece of evidence is already in the material.
It is.
The 12-gigawatt non-binding agreement with Switch. We just aren't using that evidence aggressively enough to counter the bear case.
That's the most actionable path forward. Instead of just dismissing the efficiency argument as, something that growth will solve, you frame the response around the sheer magnitude of the committed pipeline.
So, a concrete example would be?
One concrete example is to explicitly connect that 12-gigawatt deal to this very problem. You say, look, even if a new generation of chips is hypothetically 100 times more efficient, which would be a monumental leap, the total gigawatt demand being validated by this one deal proves the total volume of compute required is already so massive that it will outpace those localized improvements.
That's a really powerful reframing.
Right?
It shifts the whole discussion away from some theoretical chip improvement and back to an undeniable, massive infrastructure commitment. You're basically turning their bear case into a structural demonstration of your bull case.
You're using the scale of the customer validation as the shield.
And it makes the argument self-supporting, rooted in the material's own evidence. That really elevates the credibility, especially for anyone who gets the scale of what 12 gigawatts actually means.
Exactly.
Understood. That market validation it's undeniable. But, securing 12 gigawatts of demand only matters if the technology itself is presented with enough clarity and rigor to match that ambition. So let's look at the product description itself.
Okay.
OKLO is presenting its product as this fundamental redesign. It's a liquid metal-cooled fast fission reactor. It runs on recycled fuel, and it operates for over 10 years without refueling. And the term they use consistently is nuclear battery.
And while that nuclear battery is a highly compelling and, let's be honest, a very catchy market concept, incorporating greater technical precision would really strengthen the report's credibility and clarity, especially when you're describing its long operational life.
Yeah, the material uses nuclear battery a lot to describe that 10-plus year fuel cycle. But in a high-risk pre-revenue context, blurring the lines between a fission fuel cycle and, say, chemical energy storage, it can accidentally diminish the focus on what makes the Aurora design so unique.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, we're talking about a proprietary mechanism here, not some generic device. And that kind of linguistic ambiguity, it risks diluting the technological sophistication.
So the suggestion?
The suggestion for improvement is to clearly differentiate the benefit, which is that long operational independence, from the mechanism, which is fast fission and fuel recycling. We should be leaning into the proprietary advantages that a true chemical battery, even a huge one, just can't offer.
Okay, let's unpack that a little. If we move away from that general battery analogy, what are the specific competitive advantages we should be hitting on?
I think a much more compelling way to frame this would be to focus on two proprietary elements. So one actionable path is to really emphasize the operational benefits of running on recycled nuclear fuel.
Okay.
This isn't just about power, it's an active transformation. We're talking about taking spent fuel from traditional reactors, which is a massive environmental liability that costs utilities millions to store, and turning it into a valuable long-term power asset.
That framing makes the tech sound like a solution to two massive problems, waste and energy supply, not just one.
Absolutely. And that positions OKLO as a pioneer in the circular economy, not just another power provider.
Right. And the second path?
The second actionable path is to highlight the unique engineering advantage of the low-pressure operation of its liquid metal cooling design. Low-pressure operation isn't just some technical detail. It fundamentally changes the regulatory profile, it simplifies the safety apparatus, and it dramatically reduces the manufacturing complexity compared to old-school pressurized water reactors.
And that combination of inherent safety and simpler manufacturing is the real operational advantage we need to underscore.
That's the one.
So rephrasing that decade-long runtime as something like offering unparalleled operational independence for data centers via a decade-long factory-sealed fuel core that consumes nuclear waste. That seems to capture both the marketing benefit and the technical rigor much better than just calling it a battery.
Precisely. It elevates the language to match the sophistication of the technology itself. It grounds the technological value proposition in the unique physics of the thing, not just how long it lasts.
That clarifies the product's identity significantly. Okay, now let's dig into the third major point. This one involves the inherent tension between the small size of the unit and the sheer scale of the ambition.
Right.
The Aurora design capacity is a compact 15 to 50 megawatts, yet the potential pipeline, especially with that switch deal, is 12 gigawatts. That's a utility-scale ambition being delivered by hundreds of small units. And the recent Siemens deal for the turbine for the first powerhouse just affirms that challenge.
And the execution and operational risks that come with achieving that massive 12-gigawatt pipeline warrant a much more rigorous and, frankly, balanced examination in the bear case section.
Right now, the current downside section focuses almost exclusively on regulatory delays, specifically NRC approval. And that's critical. It's existential, but it only addresses the approval of the design.
Right.
It completely overlooks the massive industrial and manufacturing complexity of scaling up from that single first unit, the one that Siemens is building the turbine for, to the hundreds of individual units you'd need to deliver 12 gigawatts of power. That logistical risk feels like a huge gap in the downside analysis.
Building on that, nuclear has historically been a custom-built, bespoke industry. OKLO is essentially betting the whole farm that they can turn their SMRs into something more like high-tech, factory-produced equipment.
High-volume manufacturing.
Exactly. So the suggestion for improvement is to expand the downside section to include a comprehensive assessment of scale and manufacturing risk. The material needs to show that it has considered the logistical challenge of moving from a single prototype to factory-scale production and deployment.
So the argument needs to evolve beyond just, will the NRC approve the design, to, can OKLO actually industrialize nuclear power at the speed required? That jump from one prototype to hundreds, it must be terrifyingly complex. We need to convey that gravity in the risk analysis.
Exactly. We need to address the shift from PowerPoint slides to hardware explicitly in the risk section. One actionable path here is to assess the potential supply chain constraints for rapid deployment of specialized turbines and components. That Siemens contract is great for the first turbine.
But what about the 250th?
What about the 250th unit needed to meet that 12-gigawatt pipeline? Is there enough manufacturing depth in the global supply chain to support that kind of compressed timeline?
That's a key distinction. The factory itself becomes the new regulatory choke point, totally independent of the government.
And another crucial actionable path is assessing the financial risk of building the massive factory infrastructure needed to mass produce these compact units. If the demand, which is validated by Switch, materializes faster than the factory capacity can be built, qualified, and debugged.
Then you have a massive bottleneck.
A massive bottleneck and deployment delays that have nothing to do with the NRC. You need to quantify the risk of the capital expenditure for that factory ramp-up and the potential operational delays if the manufacturing line hiccups, much like the early challenges faced by high-volume EV manufacturers.
That is such a critical point. The regulatory hurdle is existential, yes, but the scaling hurdle is purely logistical and could just as easily halt progress even if they get regulatory success. We absolutely need that industrial scale risk quantified to make sure the risk analysis is as ambitious as the bull case itself.
It demonstrates a maturity in the analysis that really matches the sophistication of the tech and, frankly, the audience.
This has been incredibly valuable, really aimed at maximizing the impact of this material and providing a much more robust discussion for our listener. So to briefly summarize the 3 main areas for improvement.
First, strengthen that core AI energy crisis narrative. Ground the rebuttal to efficiency gains in the specific magnitude of the Switch 12-gigawatt pipeline. Make the argument self-supporting and structural rather than just relying on, generalized expert consensus.
Second, refine the use of the nuclear battery metaphor. Emphasize the unique operational advantages, namely running on recycled fuel and that low-pressure design, to really enhance technical credibility and differentiate the product from generic energy storage.
And finally, expand the bear case. It needs a detailed assessment of the execution, manufacturing, and industrial scale-up risks required to actually realize that massive 12-gigawatt pipeline. Make sure the analysis moves beyond the sole focus on NRC regulatory delays to address the factory floor realities of industrializing nuclear power.
Implementing these suggestions will significantly increase the material's robustness and analytical depth, especially for a sophisticated audience that's interested in the physical reality of AI infrastructure. We look forward to seeing the updated work.
Absolutely. And feel free to submit your material back in again for further feedback.